You are listening to the Beat London 103.6 FM with me, Sashel. I am with you for an hour because we are interrupting your drive time show today for another informative panel discussion here on the Beat London in conjunction with Brent Council. And today we are going to be talking about childhood immunisations. Now, this is a topic that is relevant to almost everybody in their lives at some point, whether you are growing up yourself and you've either had them or not had them, or whether you're becoming a parent or you are a parent and you're wondering whether you should have them for your children. Remember, you can get involved in the conversation through our social media at the Beat 103.6 FM on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. Now, as you may be aware, childhood immunisation programmes were disrupted by COVID-19 and the numbers are down on previous years, and they can make a difference to your health of your children. And we have a couple of GPs and an amazing parent to talk about the importance of having these immunisations and the different kind of immunisations you can have, what they are and what to do to catch up if your child has fallen behind. So I just want to introduce the panel very, very quickly. So first of all, we have Dr. Nigel. Dr. Nigel, hello, how are you? Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Pleased to be invited. Yeah, thank you.
Amazing. Can you give me a little rundown of your experience, what you do, where you work, just kind of a summary of who you are?
I'm a GP. I work in Neasden and I've been working there for 30 years. As a GP, seeing many people of all age groups, especially families with young children, and seeing them through those growing years.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will get into some questions with you very shortly. We also have Dr. Joanna. Dr. Joanna, can you hear me? How are you? Are you there?
Yes, hello. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you give me a little summary on your background and what you do in the NHS?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a GP as well. I have a special interest in paediatrics. I work in Northwest London at Brentfield Medical Centre. I've worked there for a few years now, and I also am their lead for childhood immunisations, so do a lot of work in the community regarding this.
Amazing, amazing. Rebecca, hello. You're an immunisation coordinator, aren't you?
Yes, so I'm the Immunisation Coordinator for Northwest London CCG, and I look after Brent. I also have a background in paediatric nursing and immunisations in school.
And can you just tell me what is an immunisation coordinator? Because I know a lot of people heard that and thought, what's that? What do you do?
So an immunisation coordinator, so my job is to try and support increasing the uptake in children's IMS under 5 years old within Brent, working with the GPs, local authority and the communities.
Excellent, amazing. And Rhoda, hello, how are you? Can you hear me?
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me here. My name is Rhoda Ibrahim. I am member of communities in Brent, a mother of children who were born here, and yeah, a community worker really who persuades all the time or convinces people to have their children vaccinated.
I like that. I like that. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. It's such an important conversation that we're having. I mean, what we're trying to do here on the Beat London is make sure we are raising awareness and we are talking about topics that affect everybody, regardless of your age, your social class, your background. These are topics that are central to us as a community. So let's start about asking, what are vaccines? I mean, we've all heard the word, of course, and we've heard the word quite a lot more since the pandemic, actually. So Joanna, can you talk to me about what vaccines are?
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. We've heard this word thrown around a lot, and vaccinations or immunizations are sort of two interchangeable terms that you might hear. So vaccines, I quite like sort of the medical history of it. They've actually been going for many, many years. In fact, since the 1700s, where someone actually discovered the most amazing thing that if you introduced an inactive or weakened version of a virus or bacteria into the body, that it could somehow actually help to prevent you catching this disease, which you can imagine at the time was this incredible novel discovery. But actually since then, it's helped us to discover vaccinations, and the first being smallpox vaccination, which has led to the eradication of that disease altogether. And so effectively, a vaccine is a safe and effective way of preventing us from catching a disease and becoming unwell from that disease.
Because a lot of people might hear that and think, wow, so in order to help me be prevented from a disease, I must be given the disease. And they might freak out. They might freak out, you know. But how do they work? How do they actually protect us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can completely understand that, because you must feel very sort of worried about the thought that we're actually introducing a disease into the body. But I think it's very important to sort of differentiate between a disease and then the thing that causes the disease. So actually disease means our bodies and how we react to that disease and causing illness in our bodies. And then the thing that can cause it can be like a virus or bacteria. So basically what we're doing, we're not introducing the actual disease into the body, but we're introducing an inactive form of that virus or bacteria into the body. And you're asking what exactly happens there. So basically our bodies have this wonderful defense system. So if we come into contact with something that the body thinks, no, that's foreign, that's bad, it's going to cause disease in us, then it will start to fight back and produce something called antibodies. Now, if you came into contact with that virus or bacteria for the first time ever, your body will start to do that, but actually it could cause that disease in your body, so make you very unwell. But when we vaccinate, we're actually allowing the body to recognize that disease or bacteria, or that virus, and actually start producing those antibodies, so that next time it comes into contact with that virus or bacteria, that it will be ready to fight it. And our immune systems are amazing. I mean, they're they have a great memory, if you like. So it's about sort of your body remembering that that's something bad and then being ready to attack it in the future. That will stop you from becoming unwell.
I mean, it's so interesting. There's so much to this. And you say that you put like an inactive version into the body. What does that mean? What is an inactive version as opposed to an active version?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you sort of hear these terms kind of live and non-live vaccine, and that can be quite frightening, because you think, does that mean something's a living thing being put into my body? But actually the difference there is so a vaccine is basically something that is either inactivated, so dead form of that virus or bacteria, or it can be a significantly weakened version. So not enough that it will cause a disease in your body, but enough that your immune system can react to it. So live vaccines are ones that are still living, but they're sort of a significantly weakened or changed version. And then non-live vaccines have changes to them that help them to make it sort of dead and inactive. So it's never going to cause that disease. Neither one will cause disease in the body.
Yeah. Okay, because it's interesting, because a lot of people might think, wow, am I actually giving my child a live disease? You know, I mean, what would you say to that?
Yeah, so the reassuring thing is that these are produced, so they don't cause the disease in the person. And by that I mean the symptoms, the things that can cause long-term complications. Of course, children do tend to get a fever. They can feel a little bit unwell after a vaccine, but that's actually, if we don't want children to feel unwell, of course, but it's a good thing in the sense we know their bodies are reacting, and that's our immune systems gradually building antibodies to fight against it.
Wow, incredible. Thank you. There's so much to this. It's so insightful. I really appreciate you going into it for me. Rebecca, just a quick one. You are, of course, the Immunization Coordinator. When are children supposed to have their vaccinations, their immunizations? What is the schedule?
The schedule. So initial routine vaccines for children in the UK begin when normally around 8 weeks. So your baby will normally have an 8-week check at the GP practice. This initial vaccine might be given by the GP or the practice nurse on the day, or you might be booked in shortly afterwards to receive it. The first set are given at 8 weeks, then 12 weeks, and then 16 weeks. And this protects against diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, polio, influenza B, hepatitis B, Men B, rotavirus, and pneumococcal. So it's quite a lot to go in, and I'm sure the doctors will explain that later on in the show. You'll then be invited back to your GP when your child turns 1 year of age to receive their first MMR and any additional doses of the vaccines previously given in the first set. And when your child turns 3 years and 4 months, you and your child will be invited back to the GP to receive their second MMR and their boosted diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough and polio vaccination, which is especially important as it is likely your child will be then mixing with more children as they start nursery and they start school, hence the name the preschool booster.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hence that
you
name.
Because you're saying that's the kind of schedule of when you're
That's the kind of schedule. Yeah, absolutely. There are children whose vaccination history is not known or may not align to the UK vaccine schedule, perhaps if you've come from abroad. So your GP practice is well equipped to review this with you and your vaccination schedule with your child to ensure that full protection against the diseases we have spoken about is given.
Wow, incredible. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Rhoda, hello, how are you?
Hi, good. Fine.
So you're a service user, of course. You've got experience of these vaccinations that Rebecca just mentioned. Can you tell me a little bit about what your experience was like?
Actually, I may have. Joanna said 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and 16 weeks. But there is a dose that's been given to my children at the hospital within a week after they were born. BCG. What is that?
Oh, you had one. Oh, okay. So your children had a vaccination or an immunization when they were in hospital?
8 days after they were born.
8 days. Rebecca, do you know about that one?
So I think Nigel and Joe will be able to advise on that. Yeah.
Okay. Joe, yeah.
Yeah, so that would have been your BCG, and Rebecca's absolutely right. So this isn't included in the standard national sort of childhood immunisations, but it is given to some babies. So it's mainly given to babies who are at higher risk because it protects against TB. So from areas of the UK where we know TB rates are high, and also from babies whose parents or are themselves born in a country where TB rates are high. So some babies, particularly London, is a common place that this is given because we know TB rates are a little bit higher. But that is an extra one that some may have and some won't, and that will be very soon after birth.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. So if you're at home listening and your child has got a vaccination at 8 weeks or 8 days, shall I say, just as they come out of the hospital, then of course it's because they've taken the decision, shall I say, to kind of give you the immunization due to the high risk of tuberculosis or whatever the vaccine is for. They've decided to give that to your child. So Rhoda, what were your initial thoughts about giving your children the immunizations? Were you always okay with it? Was it something that you had to think about?
Yes, really, I was okay with it by the time that I had the children, and somehow when I was back in my home, I had the chance to work with international organizations like Oxfam.
Okay, yeah.
And Save the Children, who actually was part of our work was really to encourage people and to get the vaccination. And then when I came here, actually, then it was, and I had the children. It was normal for me. And yeah, I didn't really have any, but as a community worker now, within a mother's organization, we are a mother's organization, we always come to ask questions about that because a lot of the information is English and they may not even understand why do they have to give their children the vaccination.
Yeah. So how old are your children?
He's 19 and 20, but the mothers who, I think the message is always improve. But they come to us whether they give or not. Some of them are not even taken until now.
Yes,
and the other children had clearly the impact of not having the polio one, and they have seen it. So it's still a long way to go to convince them to have their children. I get that. And answer the questions. We are the first stop they come to answer to for any GP or the health workers because of the language limitation.
Of course, the language barrier. Yeah. No, I get that. Thank you. Appreciate that. And we've mentioned quite a few different diseases, if you like. Already it's only just over 15 minutes in, and we've mentioned quite a few. We've mentioned TB, measles, mumps, rubella. Joanna, would you mind just talking us through what each of them are and how they can be dangerous to children?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thank you, Rosa, and thanks, Rebecca, for sort of talking about the immunisation schedule. You're absolutely right. There's lots of diseases that we vaccinate against in the childhood schedule, and it can feel sometimes overwhelming for parents because there's quite a lot that we give. But actually, babies' immune systems there are very strong, and they can cope with all of those being given. But I think sometimes it may not be fully explained what these diseases are and why should I have my baby or child vaccinated against it. So I mean, the ones that a lot of parents hear about and particularly worry about are sort of, for example, meningitis. So we vaccinate against meningitis B and C, and also something called Haemophilus, which can be a cause of meningitis in children as well, and also cause respiratory illness. So these ones are included in the vaccination schedule, and I think a lot of parents listening will know the term meningitis because it's often a fear that people think about. So particularly that age group are sort of at higher risk of those. We also vaccinate against something called Rotavirus. Now, parents may have heard of this because it's the only oral vaccine actually given in the childhood.
Yes.
So it's given little drops in the baby's mouth. If your child is actually not sort of, or a bit delayed in their immunisations, they may not be given this one. And that's because it's a virus that's mainly at risk for little babies. So it's only given at that younger age. And this can cause a horrible sort of diarrhea type illness in babies that can be quite nasty. And that's why we like to protect against that one. So I think it's an important one to say because parents wonder why you're giving something.
Yeah, because isn't it a kind of common misconception that an immunisation or a vaccine is through a needle? So it's interesting when you're saying that it's an oral one, that it essentially does the same thing, but it's just injected in a different way. I mean, I'm going off just a little bit here, but I'm wondering, is there a reason why that's the only one that's oral as opposed to some of the others?
Yeah, so because that one particularly affects the gut, so it's actually given into the gut, and that helps our immune system and our gut to prepare that if they came into contact with that in future, that they'd be able to fight it off a lot more easily. And that one is a live vaccine, so it does sort of, it shouldn't produce any sort of significant illness in the baby at all, but it does mean that your gut is especially primed to be able to deal with that if you came in contact with it in the future.
Okay, that's good to know. So we've spoken about rotavirus, we've spoken about meningitis, measles, mumps.
Yes, I think measles, mumps and rubella are really important ones to talk about because so they come in the combined vaccination, the MMR, people may have heard of. So going through them sort of one by one, measles is an illness that can classically cause a rash and a high temperature and a sort of flu-like illness in young children. It is unfortunately on the rise a little bit at the moment in the UK, so as doctors we are seeing more and more of it. The important reason why we vaccinate against this is because it is a self-limiting illness in general in most children, so that it will gradually settle over time on its own, but it can come with its own complications. So it can cause for example, meningitis, and it can also make them sort of feel very unwell. As well, the very important thing about pneumonia is it can, measles is it can cause pneumonia and also can actually cause blindness in children, which I think a lot of people don't realise, and that can sound quite frightening. It is still sort of, you know, one of those ones that we are seeing just creeping up a little bit in the UK. And so we very much want to encourage that vaccination.
People to get that. Just before you move on, just as we're talking about the MMR, there has been a lot of concern that the MMR is linked to autism. Nigel, could you just give me a very quick summary or explanation of what you would say to that, because that is quite a big concern amongst parents?
I appreciate it's a really big concern. It's a really big concern that all the vaccines we give could have dangers and be dangerous. medically, we don't want to make any of our patients ill by anything we do. We do know that some medicines we give, many medicines we give, can have side effects. And we work really hard to make sure that everything we do is as absolutely completely safe as possible. So going back about 25 years, there was a big scare that MMR could cause autism. And medical research is a really big thing. It's going on all the time, looking at safety, looking at improving health. And medical research goes through quite a lot of stages. There's often very tiny little research projects going on to see if an idea in our head is linked with an illness, like does having a tin of tomato soup cause deafness or something? That's an idea in our head, and we need a research project to do it. So the first stage would be very small, maybe just a couple of dozen people, to see if there's any real link. And with tomato soup, I don't think it does cause deafness. It would just be ended there. So there's a lot of scare with this initial research. A tiny number of people, I think 10, 12 people, and personal mates and chums of the researcher. And there's been a huge, vast amount of work over the last 25 years or so since that scare came out on the safety of MMR. And it hasn't been shown up on any of these research projects anywhere in the world.
Oh,
and that's really important. And as doctors, as nurses, as health professionals, we don't want to do anything which would cause illness or be unsafe for our patients. We want to make sure that we do all we can. And as Joanna was saying, measles is a nasty illness. If you get it in pregnancy, can seriously damage babies, and we want to do as much as possible to keep people safe.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Thanks for shedding light on that, because that's something that I've heard quite a lot. You know, I'll give my children all of these immunizations except the MMR because I don't want them to have autism, or I don't want them to have a really bad reaction or something like that. So it's quite good to know that in your professional opinion, it's based on something that's quite outdated.
Well, yeah, and also we can get complacent. We haven't seen big killer illnesses in England for an awful long time. We don't think of infectious illnesses as being big killers, and then suddenly out of the blue from nowhere, COVID comes. It makes Brent suffer terribly in COVID. As a practice, we're getting people ringing up every day, all day, hundreds of calls every week. I'm ill with COVID, and then we get people here that are in hospital and people dying, and suddenly out of the blue, there's an illness which is part of the sort of like the flu bug thing, and oh dear, well, nothing to worry about, and it's killing people. We can get so complacent so easily because the vaccines are being successful. We're not seeing these things. As a kid, I did get measles, and I have all the sort of squits and snotty noses and coughs I had as a kid. I remember having measles. It was an awful bad illness. I didn't get the complications, but as Joanna said, they're real. And I remember the stats that in England before the measles vaccine came in the 90s, it was like 100 kids would die of measles, mostly the meningitis, and 100 kids would get this awful long-term thing about 4 or 5 years later, a very slow onset incurable meningitis called pansclerosing. We don't see it now, but what happened was you get ill, you get the measles, you think you've got over it, back to normal, and then things would go wrong.
Yeah.
This
wow.
long slow thing. We just forget it. We just forget all about it because we don't see it. I know, well, there's nothing to worry about. But if we get complacent, we could be in dark water.
Yeah, no, exactly. Thank you, Nigel. Appreciate that. Sorry, Joanna, back to you. So we were talking about some of the vaccinations, immunizations that the children have. I mean, we've spoken about the MMR, we've spoken about meningitis. Polio, is that one as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the polio is included in the 6-in-1. So you might have heard of that one, as Rebecca explained. And there's a lot of sort of questions sometimes I get from parents saying sort of, oh, hang on a second, hasn't polio been eradicated? And sort of why do we now need to vaccinate against that? And it's a really, really good question, you know, because you start to think, why am I putting something into my child that actually doesn't really exist in the UK anymore? I mean, I think, you know, we'll talk later, and I'm sure we'll touch on points of the current worries about polio. Yes. But yes, it just shows why it is important to vaccinate, continue to vaccinate against something like polio, even if it has been eradicated in the UK, because actually we know the minute you stop the vaccinations, we know that cases can come back.
Can reoccur, yeah.
And
what is it? What does it kind of look like? What is it? What are the symptoms?
Yeah, so it's a nasty, very nasty illness. But again, in fact, as Nigel has very rightly said, we do become complacent because actually none of us here, or not many of us here in the UK, would have necessarily seen many polio cases. And so it somehow seems this far away thing. But actually, you know, those of us who unfortunately have seen cases will remember it, because it invades effectively the nervous system and can cause paralysis and also wasting of the muscles.
Wow.
And difficulties in walking and things like that. So it's quite a frightening one, and you know, that's why we continue to vaccinate in the childhood programme.
No, I love that. I absolutely love that. And just very quickly going on, as you mentioned, the childhood programme, Rebecca, just a quick one, as the immunisation coordinator, how do you kind of reinforce that? What do you do that kind of makes people remember that they have to take their vaccinations in the community if they forget? Are there things that you're doing locally to kind of support people?
So the GP practices are responsible for what's called call and recall. So they have a schedule of when the vaccines are due, and they will text parents and they will book them into appointments. Of course, some parents can't always make appointments. You know, there's D&As and everything in life, but it's really important to sort of follow up on those text messages, those letters, to get those vaccinations. And I think one thing that I've learned because I was vaccinating last year for COVID, is sometimes some parents just need a little handhold, and they just need someone to talk through any concerns. And I think sometimes if they feel that they need to come to an appointment and immediately vaccinate their child, sometimes they won't actually take that offer up. So, you know, the GP practices, the nurses are available to discuss and have an appointment to discuss those concerns as well, so that parents can go away and think about it and make a decision based on the information.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, we will come back onto that, but it's just, I think it's quite important to know, actually these are the principles, these are the things that are in place. If you want to get advice, there's loads of resources that people can look at. We will talk about those later, and we will let people know where to go, where they can find more information, where they can do their research, reputable sources for people to look at. But I do think it's quite important.
And I think the importance of attending your appointment for those vaccinations, it not only protects your child, but it protects other children. So there's you know, a lot of children will not have their MMR until they're 1 year, so all those children under 1 are susceptible to measles if there's a population that aren't vaccinated. So it's very important to vaccinate your child, but also we're looking to, you know, protect those children that probably won't have vaccines at their ages at that time. And
I don't know, I mean, shout at me who you think is the best person to kind of answer this, but are vaccinations mandatory? Do you have to have them? I don't know who, Joanna, Nigel, Rebecca, who are they mandatory in the country? Do we have to have them, Nigel?
No. UK law is your human right to decide what you want to do with your child. We will encourage it as much as possible, but it's very, very much your right as a parent what you do with the child all the way through, which is different, because in the States, it's your human right not to have the vaccine, but it's your legal obligation as a parent to make sure your kids go to school. And the schools won't admit the kids unless they've had the vaccines, especially the MMR.
Right.
So the Americans get around it in a really dodgy way, but in England we're more upfront and transparent, and it's up to you and you're right. But we would really, really, really encourage it.
Of course, and to, especially like you were saying, Rebecca, to protect those other children that your child will essentially integrate with is quite important.
And I think what Nigel's saying is, you know, it is everyone's right to make that decision. But I think we just, as professionals, we want to make sure that parents have got the right information to make those decisions,
the right resources, exactly. To make informed decisions as opposed to feeling like they're just having to follow some steps. And I think that's quite important when it comes to immunizations. I've spoken to parents about this topic, and a lot of people feel like they have no choice, they have to do it. So that causes quite a bit of resistance, especially if you're not informed on what they do and how they can benefit. A lot of people tend to think, actually, no, I'm not going to do it. And it's like, if you have the right information and the right support, then you can make that decision accordingly, you know. So it is a really important topic. And speaking of immunizations, I know that we were talking about having them or giving them to our children. I mean, we've had them when we were children as well. But do they, Nigel, do they just protect us as children, or do they protect us when we grow up as well?
They protect. Some of them wear off a bit, but they do protect. Some of them need boosters as we get older. Some of them need boosters, like you have a nasty car accident, but tetanus booster in a hospital unit. But we will leave some immunity behind. And some it protects in a slightly funny way. So with measles, the older you are when you get measles, all ages are at risk. So babies are as much are at risk, but the older you are when you get measles, the more risk there is. So again, coming back to my own experience with measles, I'm younger than my brother, and I remember being really ill with it. I remember him being far worse than me. He was 3 years older, and when he got it, it was much, much worse. But polio is an illness which we've talked about. Again, the babies and the young children can get the complications. But one of the things which we just forget, because it's all in the history, and the history is so big we can't learn all our history. Polio would affect people in overcrowded conditions more than others. So in the sort of 50s after the war, housing developments meant that people weren't as crowded as they had been before the war. And polio wasn't getting into the children so much. But it was getting into young adults. And there was a whole pile of young adults in the 50s who were getting polio and really badly ill with it and dying with it. And when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, there was this thing, iron lung, which I never quite understood. There was people whose respiratory, their chest muscles were paralyzed, they couldn't breathe. And they're put in these special machines called iron lungs, which would make them breathe, hoping that they would get through the illness until their muscles recovered a bit, but many didn't. So giving the vaccine in young people means that the immunity is in place then, rather than the risk of getting it older in this much, much worse illness. Rubella, we give it to the kids, but rubella as an illness doesn't affect too bad. It's when a pregnant woman gets it, severely damaged babies. We've got at least 2 people in our practice now in their 40s, maybe 50s, with permanent injury, with learning difficulties and blindness and deafness from, unfortunately, their mothers getting polio when they were pregnant. So there's all sorts of different protective mechanisms going on in different stages of our life. And one thing which we're not focusing on today is the vaccine to protect girls against the cervix cancer. That was started probably about 15 years back, and it's working. So the numbers of cases of pre-cancer and cancer we're getting in women in their 20s is really tumbling. So giving a vaccine at a certain age, the right age, based on all the research and what's happened over the years, and sometimes things shift and change a bit as new evidence comes out, protects at different stages in our lives.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because, like, when you're a parent or when you're in that situation where you're thinking about these things, you often kind of get influenced by other people that you know, friends, family, and even the news, even the media. You know, I mean, the media plays a big part in people's interpretation of these diseases, if you like. Could you talk to us just a little bit about what we've seen recently in the news? Some of the, some of these cases are rising. I've even heard about there being sewage that contains polio in London. You know, there are things like measles rising, things that are going to really scare people who have got young children. Could you talk to us just a little bit about what that is like and what the impact is of that?
Firstly, with the media, what we've got to remember is the media won't sell a newspaper or get people to watch a television article because baby Jones had a vaccine and was quite well. That's not going to sell a story. What will tell a story is some story that baby Jones had to be rushed to hospital and awful things happened. So we've got to be very careful with what the media picks up as something to print and publish.
Right.
In terms of rising numbers, there's outbreaks of measles now in London with all the risks that we said, and reports of live polio appearing in sewage samples. So as much as sewage is created on a daily basis, as we use toilets and everything else we do,
Yeah.
there are people going down into the sewage to keep them clean and keep them flowing, and also doing samples on what's there and what germs are around. And there's polio found. So the polio is coming from somewhere. And as much as the whole sewage industry is geared at trying to clear up and make sure that things don't happen, it's coming from somewhere to get into the sewers. And that means people are being exposed somewhere in the system. And we don't know how good the sewage systems are at clearing all the polio out and making sure it doesn't get back into the supplies and back into the environment. So we've always got to be careful. It's so easy to get lazy. And this has happened ever since the vaccines have been started, that people think, well, it's nothing to worry about, nothing going on, and I won't bother. And then there's a rise. It gets in the news and people do react, people do get their vaccines done, but we don't want to see those rises. We want to protect everybody, because as far as we're concerned, medically, one case is then a risk to that individual, risk to an unknown risk. We don't want to see it something which is so good and so preventable.
Yeah, no, of course. And you just mentioned rises. I don't know if you know this, but in your professional opinion, are the rises kind of linked to a particular maybe social class or culture, or is it just generally across the board?
I haven't heard the statistics on it, but medically, illness occurs at younger age groups in people who have less wealth.
Okay.
So the more wealth you get, yes, you're susceptible to the same illnesses, but at an older age group. The less wealth, the more susceptible you are to a younger age group, and also the more susceptible you are that the illness will be worse. Why? We don't know. This is all attached onto government policies of health inequalities at the moment, often associated with wealth, but it's there, and we've got to acknowledge those groups who are at more risk than others.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's interesting. And then, do you know what it is? It's just, I feel like a lot of parents have got these concerns that they just feel like they haven't got the answers to. As much as we're talking about it now and we're raising awareness now, I think there is still a lot of work to be done. And if you are listening in at home, please get in touch with us on the socials at the Beat 1036 FM, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. Make sure you let us know what your concerns are. I mean, we can, after the show, put your concerns to our panel and get you some answers if you are concerned about anything in particular. But one thing I've heard quite a lot is that some parents are a little bit concerned about what's in the vaccine. I heard someone say that they believe that there's egg in some of the vaccines. Do you know exactly what is in the vaccine and what they contain, Nigel? Could you tell us a bit about that?
I'd have to study for each one, but there is egg product in the measles vaccine, and Rebecca and Joanna will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the white of the egg which is sort of like not seen as having any risk at all. This is the way it's made. One of the vaccines we get in the winter, and we'll be coming up to, well, the winter starts pretty soon, is the flu vaccine for children. There are two flu vaccines, one which is squirted through a special syringe into the nose, which does contain pork products, and one which is an injection, which does not contain pork products. So it's important that people who want to know this information are aware of that and are aware of the alternatives. And there are alternatives which work and which can be very safe, but you generally have to ask for them. They're not like the first off the shelf.
Yeah, I've had someone ask here, if I don't give my child the vaccine, does that mean they're not protected from the disease? Can someone, what do you think, Nigel, Joanna?
Joanna?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you for that question. And it's a really good question. I think ultimately, it can happen that you can come across that disease in the community, and you may not get unwell from it. So actually there's just because you come into contact with someone with that disease doesn't mean you necessarily have these symptoms and the complications yourself. But sometimes having a contact just of that disease in the community can stimulate your immune system to sort of produce some level of protection. And we see that in tuberculosis, for example, people who've had some sort of contact at some point in their lives. But I think the important thing to note is it's often not enough to produce complete protection from that virus or bacteria. It certainly, if your child has had that disease in the past, then there may be some protection from that. So again, your body may be primed and have prepared by producing those antibodies that I mentioned before, particularly with certain ones like measles often, or rubella, for example, can be one that you sort of catch once, and doesn't mean you'll never have it again, but it's sort of you're fairly protected. But by far, I think the ultimate thing to say is by far the best way to protect our children against these diseases is by immunizing them, because we know that actually vaccines are very, very effective. They're not 100%, as nothing is in our health system. No treatment, nothing we do in medicine is 100%. But actually for a vaccination to have gone through the many stages of production that it goes through, and to be on the market, it has to have at least 50% effectiveness. But actually most of the childhood vaccines in our immunization schedule have between around 90 to 100% effectiveness. So obviously it does vary person to person, just like any treatment, but we do know that is sort of by far the best way to protect our children.
I love that.
I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you. And Rhoda, just very...
Sorry, may I put an analogy to that? So one thing, the way I sort of explain it is, when you get into a car, you might not ever have a crash, but you always put a belt on just in case. So it's preventative. It's preventing that happening.
That's absolutely. Yeah, I really like that, Rebecca.
Yeah, what a great way to explain that. That's really good, Rebecca. Thank you. Safety first. What can we say? Safety first. I love that. Rhoda, I know you've got to head off very shortly, but just quickly, I know you've got children yourself. They've gone through the vaccination process. The word vaccine for me, and I'm sure a lot of people, still has a little bit of a stigma. In some of the community work that you do, what kind of attitudes do you get towards child immunizations and vaccines when you speak to people?
It's really different after the COVID-19. The people get used to it. Most of them get used to it. The children's vaccination, and then those who have got underlying health like the flu vaccination, flu jab, and these kind of things will really become more of a familiar. But when the COVID came and the COVID vaccination came, was really a big challenge, and it does exist a lot. But the good thing was you could relate to that, literally prevention that you said it. So it was we allow our children to be vaccinated at a young age when they didn't have a choice, and it was for preventing them for a further. And some of them really has experience. Those who were resisting experienced, for example, measles has already got into their children, or even polio, and as a result of that, they actually you could show them through the many years that I was a community worker. So vaccination is positive. Yeah. And yeah, different from years when they started. When it was started, vaccination was associated to, they are trying to limit having more children or this kind of, but actually it's not. Over the years, that stigma. Yeah.
So you're saying that there were some kind of myths, some misconceptions surrounding the conversation about immunizations, but you found that, and people are now coming to the conclusion that vaccinations are positive and vaccinations do help and they do prevent these conditions that you just mentioned. Yeah. I appreciate that. Okay, thank you so much, Rhoda. Appreciate that. Appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us today. Nigel, I've just got a quick one for you. When we are talking about giving our children the immunizations and the vaccinations, what should our parents expect? What should we expect when we go there? Should we be expecting certain symptoms? Should we be expecting injections in the thigh, injections in the arm? How does it work? What can we do to kind of reassure our parents and make sure that they're a little more informed?
I sometimes find the vaccines a little bit emotional. Sticking a needle into little children and seeing your child having a needle stuck in is not something which you readily would sort of queue up for.
Yeah.
But it is safe. It is preventative, as I hope we've made clear over the last few minutes. The vaccines are normally put in the thighs, and if there are two vaccines going at the same time, it would be one each side. And the child will cry. The child often usually cries. What I notice though is that normally once they've got the nappy back on, if it should be off, once they've got their clothes back on, and a bit of a hug and a cuddle, they're back to normal. They've forgotten about it. Certainly, even the children who scream a lot and cry a lot. My clinical room's at the front of the building, and you can hear the family go out, and by the time they're outside in their pram, jogging around, which sends all our children to sleep when we want them to, again settles the children. Some of the vaccines, particularly the meningitis B vaccine, can cause a temperature, so we always say that there should be paracetamol given alongside the vaccine at the same time, and we always encourage that and suggest it. Where the injections go, sometimes there can be a little bit of a bump or a red mark, which normally settles after a few weeks. Sometimes the child's a little bit unhappy overnight, but really very, very rarely. Mostly once the vaccine's in and the initial shock to the child's passed, which is just a few minutes, things are pretty well back to normal.
I think that's it, isn't it? I think it's that whole experience as a mum going to your GP with maybe an 8-week-old baby and just seeing your child just in that pain and screaming and crying. I think that is for a lot of people quite difficult. But of course it is for the best. But I think for me, I find, especially like I say, when speaking to mums, I find that that is the thing where they're like, because it's not just one, is it? It's they have a couple of injections on the same day, isn't that right? So I find after the first one, it's a bit like, oh, no more, because it's quite a lot emotionally, you know. And I think if parents, like you're saying, you're explaining kind of how it works, if parents have got that information, then they can be prepared for that, which means when they go there, they know their baby's going to cry, they know their baby's going to be upset, there might even be a little bit of blood, correct me if I'm wrong, Nigel, where the injection site is, but it's all perfectly normal, right? I mean, you've seen it all, you know how it works.
It is. For myself, I always try and warn them that there'll be crying and there'll be pain, but I also try to say that if I'm giving 2 injections, one each side, I want to go as quickly from one side to the other, and cuddle the baby and try and settle the baby afterwards. Because although I can't really understand the full thought process of a child, as an adult, I wouldn't like to be cuddled and told it was all over and can move on.
And then it happens again,
the other side,
Oh no, but that's kind of like a natural thing, isn't it, to want to comfort your baby and stop your baby from crying, when in fact, actually, that's good to know. It's probably best to just carry on. Yeah,
informing and preparing. Most families are up for it. Most families go with it, and it can move quite swiftly from one side to the other side, and then leave the child with the parent, and let them get themselves back together again. Yeah,
I mean, is it advisable to maybe give them some kind of distraction, maybe a bottle, maybe something to kind of take the mind off it, possibly? Is that part of the advice?
Not always possible, but I always suggest that they're given a feed maximum of 2 hours beforehand.
Okay.
And then a bottle or a feed as soon as possible afterwards, because the feeding is comfortable for babies, but that's not always possible with time.
Yeah, of course.
Babies, because babies have got more control on time with their feeds than the parents have.
Than the parents, exactly. And what kind of things have you seen? And I know you've kind of been in the industry a while, and you've seen loads of immunizations happening. What kind of things have you seen that kind of stick out to you? Are there any experiences that you think, wow, that was a stressful one, or that was actually a really good one when I thought it wouldn't be?
I guess the emotion that even giving it for a long time, I still find I get emotional reflecting the family emotion. So it's still there, especially that first vaccine for the baby and the first child, and not seeing the illnesses. You can't. It's not a wow moment because it's like Baby Jones is in good health. It doesn't make the news headlines. But not seeing those illnesses, realizing, thinking to yourself, I haven't seen that for a long time. I haven't seen that. It's not there. It's gone. And then the news articles about a surge in New York State or a surge on some island in the Pacific, where people have thought they're okay and remote and safe from everything. That brings it all back.
Yeah, no, of course. No, it's really good advice. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Rebecca, I mean, it's like I said, there is so much to this. We couldn't, I mean, an hour's nearly up already. We can't possibly cover everything. You know, if parents did want to get more information, want to get some more advice, I know you mentioned the GP, but is there any kind of evidence-based resources or any kind of information that you know that people can go to and have a look at?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, of course, your GP or practice nurse can answer any questions or queries, or if you're a bit hesitant, as they've got lots of experience giving childhood immunisations. But also there are NHS vaccination websites where you can get all the information. You can actually, you know, we're not hiding anything. You can download the schedule yourself, put it on your fridge. You can read all about the vaccines that we're giving. The World Health Organization has an immunization page. Obviously they cover everything globally. But if you do want to research the vaccines yourself, a particular website called the Vaccine Knowledge Project, which is hosted by Oxford University, has a wealth of information about vaccinations, including how vaccines are made and the science behind this, including the development and ingredients of vaccines. So parents can actually just go through each vaccine, see how it's made, see what it's there to protect. So it has information and real life stories about the diseases we are trying to prevent. So there's videos on there which are accessible via YouTube, which can also be subtitled, so that information can be shared in a range of languages from Arabic to Ukrainian. So you go on YouTube through that Oxford, the Vaccine Knowledge Project through Oxford University, you can actually, I've only just learnt this, click and put subtitles, so it will subtitle it in a range of languages. So you can sit at home in their own time and make decisions based on the information. Yeah,
definitely. And is there anything happening in Brent that is kind of, because of course we are in Brent ourselves and you're part of the Brent community, is there anything happening in Brent?
So there's some local things based around particular GP practices, because we've only just started getting going on this work. But I'm hoping to sort of go out into the communities. I'd welcome invites out into the community to try and learn what the concerns are, what would support people, and what are their motivational factors to have vaccines. So if anyone would like, you know, to put their voice forward, I'm sure they'll be able to contact you in the show.
Yeah, definitely. Do get in touch with us at the Beat 1036 FM on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we will pass those on. We will keep up the website updated and let everybody know when these events are coming up and where people can find more resources and more information. But if people wanted to get in contact with you, Rebecca, how would be the best way for them to do that?
Me directly, I'd have to look into how that would, because I cover quite a few boroughs. If I
I see.
I go home and I've got 500 emails, it might be quite difficult. But I think I think the best thing is to go via the GPs, because I'm supporting the GPs and the GP practices, and we can look at focus groups maybe within the surgeries or the PCNs or local areas, and then maybe we can get a parent attendance to those things. I'm going to be visiting children's centres as well to try and sort of support the information that's given there. So there'll be lots of ways to promote the vaccination.
Perfect. And Joanna, if people were kind of wanting to know a little bit more about your side of things, what would be the best thing for them to do? Any resources you'd recommend? Anything else that you think would be interesting for people to look into?
Absolutely. Well, I think Rebecca gave some excellent resources. I would also really recommend that website she mentioned, run by Oxford University, because it just has a wealth of information, really reassuring videos. Rebecca and I have been working together, and she's now a wonderful colleague. We're sort of starting, maybe, hopefully anyway, to roll out some sort of workshops and Q&A sessions for parents where they can just drop in and ask a GP, Immunizations Coordinator like Rebecca, and also we work with a wonderful paediatric colleague. At the moment, it is just sort of local, so it's just for a few practices that we're sort of running a pilot, but hopefully anyway in the future we might make it sort of a wider thing. So watch this space, and we'll definitely contact the Beat if we have anything like that you could perhaps let your listeners know about.
Yes, please, that'd be really useful. Thank you so much. And Nigel, any last words from you? Anything else that we've left out? Anything else that you think is important for people to know? Anything else that you think, actually, do you know what, it might be good for people to do this or have a look here?
I just think it's so important to get the children vaccinated. And one of the questions which I think you asked a few minutes ago was, will my child be safe if they're not vaccinated? Rebecca played, well, you've got to get your seatbelt on. But if everyone takes the view that the chances of getting this are so low, I'm not going to get my child vaccinated, then it really sort of like gushes into the system. It's everywhere. That's what lets it out the cage. It's not sort of like one broken pole on a long sort of round fence around a field.
Yeah.
The whole fence is down, and the germs just spreading everywhere. And causing trouble and mayhem. And when they cause mayhem, they cause absolute serious illness, and we forget about it. We forget about it. It's so easy, but just think back to sort of like 100 years ago, people died in their 40s and 50s then, and that was common. Got to 50, 60 years old, well, that's old, you know, well. Where now we think that that's still a long way, many years to go.
Yeah.
And it's still part of the way medicine's changed. It's so easy. I use this word complacent again. So easy to get complacent. So easy to forget how vulnerable we are, how fantastic our bodies are, how complicated our bodies are, but also with their complicated, fantastic stuff, which the guy Attenborough on his programs shows us animals. We forget how great we are. We're also very vulnerable.
Of course, it's really, like I say, it's really important. Go on, Rebecca. Is there one more thing?
No, I just also want to add to get information, because I can't neglect this group as well, is your health visitors and school nurses. They have got lots of information. They're probably seeing babies and children, and they are a fantastic resource as well. So do utilise them as well for information.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Really useful.
Absolutely,
thank you so much. Again, I just want to thank you all so much for your time. Really appreciate you all coming on and spending your time with us today, because it's quite an important discussion that we have to have. Today, we have been talking about childhood immunisations here on the Beat London 103.6 FM in conjunction with Brent Council, because it is super important. You've heard the conversation today. You've heard some of the diseases that we are getting immunized against. You've heard some of the effects that they can have, and you've kind of heard exactly why it's important to get them done. You know, Rebecca, please, can you give me that phrase again you said about the seatbelt, because I think it's absolutely incredible.
So we always get in a car and we never think we're going to have an accident, but we always put a seatbelt on. So we might not ever have an accident, but we put a seatbelt on just in case. Yes,
I love that. Excellent. And of course, you are listening to the Beat London 103.6 FM. We'd like you to head over to our website, where we will be putting up more resources, the resources that Rebecca mentioned earlier, and you can get more information. Please head to your GPs and your health visitors and your nurses to find out more. And that's it for today, for the broadcast on the Beat London 103.6 FM in conjunction with Brent Council. Miss Bex is coming up next.